Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out to our Friday Night Live series at Maison 10. We have a very special night tonight that we're super excited about. It is a fantastic book that we've had for this current collection, which is called This Is Our Street. And it's actually going to be prolonged for a few more weeks, so if you haven't had a chance to check it out, virtual world, and also out in New York land, please pop in and see us. But what I always do during this period of time is to kind of let everybody know what this magical, beautiful place is, in case you're the first timer, so here it goes. We're called Maison 10, House of 10. We're a concept store, art gallery, and an event space that revolves around the number 10. So that means there's always 10 categories. Art obviously is one. But then you've got your gifts, fragrances, candles, homewares, beauty, well-being products. There's always 10 in each of the categories. That means 10 featured artists, 10 candle brands, 10 fragrance brands, and we rotate out the collections every 10 weeks. It means it's all the things that we love for a 10-week cycle until the next surprise, which is going to be October 6th. So mark your calendars. If you're not on our mailing list, do sign up, because it's going to be a good one. And yeah, it'll be fun, so just take my word for it. So back to tonight, we have the lovely author, David Kennerley. And former club kid, writers, superstar, amazing fashion icon, Ernie. So, I'm going to leave it to them. I got a stutter, sorry, I need another drink. We're going to pass it off to the guys here. They're going to talk to you about this fantastic book, Getting In, and just about all that time. I was on the West Coast during this period of time, so I would pop into New York, and so I only caught like the last bit of, like Splash and like that. But I loved and heard so many amazing stories, and also have friends that have gone to so many of the great places that we do not speak of much anymore. So let's have a round of applause for our boys. Getting In.
Hi. Hello, thanks to everybody for coming and supporting us this evening. Wanted to thank you, Tom and Henri of Maison 10, not only for hosting this talk tonight, but also really just accepting Getting In to be part of their highly curated show, and it's just an honor because we love everything. I want one of everything. So, and also now I want to thank Ernie Glam, the forever young club kid who's been making contributions to the book and to supporting me after its publication.
You're welcome, and it's funny you should mention curation, because I was thinking that a lot of the clubs that we're going to be talking about were very highly curated, especially at the door. They were not inclusive.
How many of us would get in tonight?
It depended on the club. But we're very super cash these days, and that didn't go well in the early 90s. So let's get into it. David, can you talk about what drew you to the New York City club scene?
Okay. I moved to New York City at about 1990, and I was in my upper 20s. And to be honest with you, I really didn't have any friends. I was sort of struggling with my identity and my sexuality. So one night, my roommate's like, okay, I'm taking you out dancing. And we're gonna go West Side, 18th Street in Chelsea, to this club called the Roxy. Who knows the Roxy? So he took me there, and I have to say, I didn't know what to expect. I walk into this cavernous dance floor, and I was just gobsmacked by this huge, hundreds and hundreds of people that looked like they were having the time of their lives. And it was this like heady mix of drag queens, muscle guys, lesbians, straights, and club kids, and skinny geeks like me. So I kind of felt like I had found my tribe.
So it's basically your friend thought, okay, I need to teach him how to swim, so I'm going to throw him
Yes.
into the most extreme pool I can think of.
Into the deep end, yes.
Well, you survived. What made you want to keep all these nightclubs? I mean, typically when you would come out of the Roxy, there'd be a whole phalanx of people passing out the invites. and a lot of them ended up on the floor.
Yeah, no, so that was the thing, is that was the main way of promoting clubs back in the day, was through these printed club flyers. And so, you know, and because I was so new to the scene, everything was exciting to me. And so I'd walk out and the sidewalk would be carpeted with these club flyers. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're throwing these really cool pictures away. There's like really cool drag queens and hot, you know, hunky guys. And so I'm like, I decided just to start collecting them. And I kind of became a little obsessed. Some people might even say a hoarder. Yeah, but I just loved the dazzling images. I mean, there were celebrities, DJs, drag queens. I really enjoyed it. So by the end of the decade, because I went out mostly between 1990 and 1999, and by the end of the decade, I managed to collect 1,200 of those flyers.
So thank you for doing that. You lovingly memorialized them in this book. So that's a great public service, I think, because a lot of this was basically ephemera that is meant to be thrown away and certainly not kept. And if you did keep it, you would only really keep it for like a week or two, because typically those invites were discounts. So if you brought it to the club the next week, they would give you, either let you in for free or give you $5 off or whatever. So I wanted to ask you, you know, when you were putting the book together, you decided to interview scenesters. Was it hard to find the scene people?
You know, what I tried to do was, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that I interview people who come from all corners of the nightlife scene in New York City. And also, I wanted to interview some of my idols that I always had like kind of crushes on. So I would interview drag queens like Lady Bunny and Linda Simpson, DJs like Larry T and Susan Morbido, who's still very much spinning now. And then there was this go-go boy named Mark Allen, who I just had such a crush on, and his image was in all these club invites. And so the idea that I could I somehow tracked him down through social media, and just interviewing him, like I'm finally talking to this crush I had 30 years ago. And it was just, I don't know, it was kind of cool.
I think half the Roxy had a crush on him.
Oh. But he's so smart, and he's written for the New York Times, and he's, you know.
Did you invite him tonight?
He lives
in Hudson, yeah, so he was kind of far away.
We would have bought his train ticket.
Yeah. And then of course, I also enjoyed interviewing club kids such as Ernie.
So, you know, I wanted to ask you, how did you decide what clubs you were going to focus on? Because you probably had a lot of invites for lots of clubs, and there's only so many words you could write. So, how did you figure that out?
Well, because I was only going out in the 90s, I knew to focus just on that one time period. And I mostly focused on the clubs that I enjoyed and that I was able to collect club invites for. So, but what was kind of amazing with the 90s, it was what I call like a perfect storm. And because it was like an explosion of venues for nightlife for LGBTQ people. And some of those factors of the perfect storm were real estate, because in the early 90s, Manhattan, believe it or not, was still relatively affordable, and there were fringy areas like in the East Village and especially the meatpacking district. So there were a lot of clubs there. And another factor was that they came up with these club guides. One in 1991, HX, I don't know if anyone ever remembers, looking through HX to figure out where to go out back then, and Next Magazine. So they had these really well-researched club guides. And then another factor, sadly, is the AIDS crisis. Because during that time, I mean, by 1990, 90,000 people had perished from HIV/AIDS. At that time, if you got diagnosed with HIV, it was, you know, tantamount to a death sentence. So that was a period where people, LGBTQ people, had to come out of the closets and like into the streets and go into the clubs, and the clubs became almost like safe havens for these people and community builders. So we would go to these clubs, and then I would say many of the club invites talk about that the parties were benefits for causes such as GMHC and ACT UP.
That's right. So let's talk about the clubs. Let's start with the really big ones. Which was your favorite mega club?
I'd have to say it was my first club, the Roxy. And what was cool about it was actually built in 1978 as a roller disco. And then in 1990, it became more of a gay-centric club when I started going out. And it's one of those things where you walk up this gradual staircase, and then you finally emerge into the dance floor, which felt like the size of a football field, right, Ernie?
Well, yes, but actually more accurately, it was the size of a roller skating rink. Really big roller skating rink.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Right, and so there were these two bars at the end of each
Right.
end of each floor.
Yeah, and then the big oval where you would skate.
Right.
Yeah.
So they had the bars. They had these hunky go-go boys dancing on the bars, and what I also loved was, at least the nights that I went, there would be these Mylar streamers everywhere. There'd be drag queens like Lahoma Van Zandt taking this roll of toilet paper and literally skipping through the dance floor and wrapping it around the dancers. And it was just this really fun atmosphere. Like, you'd come home and you'd find glitter in your underwear.
Now, you're talking about the early Roxy from the early 90s, but
Yeah.
there was a different flavor of the Roxy later in the 90s. Can you talk about John Blair's Roxy from the late 90s?
Yeah.
It was a pretty different scene.
Yeah, once he took over Saturday nights and gradually throughout the 90s, he really wanted to focus on attractive, muscular gay men. And we had a term back in the day called the Chelsea boy. And what the Chelsea boy was, he was muscular, clean cut, and hairless. And so they would feature these pictures of these Adonises on these club invites, and it was just so. Of course, I collected those a lot. And it's also important to realize that these really were works of art. They were shot. These images were shot by Sean Khalil, and he had a real photography studio. He paid the models real money, like it was an actual, real works of art. And so I wanted to celebrate those as part of this book, is to sort of these unsung artists. I wanted to make sure that they got some credit because people were just throwing their stuff on the sidewalk. So nowadays, as most of you know, they don't really use those printed flyers anymore. And so they're digital, and if they create them, they're maybe just swiping images of hot guys off the internet, or they're generating from AI. I don't know. All I know is that it's very different than it was back in the day.
Yeah, you could take it home and lust after it.
Yes. And I did. And then the Roxy was basically shut down in I think 2007. And then they knocked it down, and now it's this luxury condo.
It's important to note, though, about the Roxy that in terms of New York City nightclubs, it had this amazing run because it ran all through the 90s and through the early 2000s. It was packed on weekends. And even in the 80s, before it became this kind of fashion-y, hipstery, and then circuit guy nightclub, it was a hip-hop and roller skating rink. So, right. There were the big freestyle scene took place at the Roxy in the early to mid 80s. So, it was a club that lasted at least 20 years, and that was the home of all these iconic music scenes in New York City.
Yeah. So now let's shift gears and talk about Ernie's favorite club, the Limelight. I'm sure people remember that. And actually, the building is one of the few clubs where the building still exists. It's that church on 20th Street and 6th Avenue. And what was so amazing is the building was built in 1850 as an Episcopal church in the Gothic style. And so when they turned it into a club in the 80s, they made sure to keep some of the details. So the stained glasses, those big arched wooden beams, the wainscoting, and even a couple of the pews. So they kept that vibe, which only made it more fun because here you were basically sinning while you were in church.
A whole lot of cinema.
Yes, exactly. And then the Limelight closed. It changed names a couple of times at the end, but it basically just faltered as a dance club in 2003. So, Ernie, what do you think made that club so fabulous?
Well, one, mostly it was in a church, so that, I mean, it's probably the most outrageous thing about it. There were a couple of iterations of the Limelight. So when Limelight first opened in the early 80s, that was the first cool Limelight, where it was more like kind of like a rock and roll type of place. I know Billy Idol used to go there a lot. I remember Grace Jones was there a lot. And that was like the fashion-y Limelight that only lasted like 2 or 3 years, and then it kind of fell out of favor. And then it became really horrible, like suburbanites would go there on the weekend. And I remember by like 1989, the promoter, Michael Alec, took me there, and it was just like, he said, we're gonna start working here. And when he took me there, I was just kind of cringing by the people who were there. And it's like, we have to throw parties for these people. And
Didn't they have a Jello wrestling?
Yeah, there was the night I went, there were women wearing bikinis, Jello wrestling in these kiddie pools on the stage in the Limelight. So that was the entertainment, and I was just horrified, but you know what, they paid us to do it. So we did it, and it turned out great. And then there was another Limelight, the Club Kid Temple Limelight, which lasted from 1990 till about 95. When the Limelight became insane, and then techno music exploded, and it became the church of techno, and long lines again. And that's I think the Limelight that a lot of people remember today.
Right.
You know, not so much the Limelight from the 80s.
And what did you get paid to go?
Well, my job at Limelight was to dress as Claire the Carefree Chicken. So I wore a chicken suit, and my job was to stand on the stage and dance. And sometimes I would swing on this swing over the dance floor. And I think they paid me like $150 a night to do it, which I thought was good money back then, because I really only did it for like 2 or 3 hours. So in my math, I was getting paid like $50 an hour to wear a chicken suit, and frankly, I would have been there anyway, so just give me the money and I'll put on the chicken suit.
So you mentioned Grace Jones. Didn't you have like some sort of story about her?
Yes. So Grace Jones would come to the Limelight a lot because I guess she was good friends with the owner, Peter Gatien. So it was a New Year's Eve, and she was asking us to give her ecstasy. And so I didn't have any ecstasy that night. I don't know why we didn't have it, because we always had ecstasy. But I did have decongestants in my So I took this decongestant, and we very grandiosely poured it into a bottle of champagne, and then the promoter, Michael Alec, handed it to Grace and said, "Oh, we just got this from Amsterdam." And then she looks at it and is like, "That doesn't look like ecstasy." Because you know how she's always smile talking like this. And it's like, "Oh yeah, you know." So she drank it. She was not stuffy that night. That's my favorite Grace Jones story.
So there's another part that it was almost like a contest that happened at the Limelight that a few people had told me about with different outrageous stories, and it was what was it called?
It's called the Hot Body Contest.
Mm-hmm. So, and you in the book, you recounted one story of one particular evening. Do you want to share that with everybody?
Very quickly, I will. Disco 2000 was the Wednesday night party that I worked at, and we had this competition called the Hot Body Contest, where basically by the end of 2 o'clock, when people were drunk, we would offer them like $100 if they would take all their clothes off on stage. So you'd be surprised how many people went on stage and tried to take their clothes off. So we made it a competition. And then there was this one night where this really hot guy came up and he decided he was going to take his clothes off. And there was some drunk woman who was going to take her clothes off, and she was determined to win the money. So they got down to, the guy took off his shirt and everything, and then all of a sudden he took his pants off. And then it turned out that he had like a missing limb, like part of his leg was cut off. So then he's like, so everybody's screaming because the naked guy, amputee, is like, you know, strutting, and then he takes the prosthesis off and starts so then the crowd is screaming, yes, yes, take it off. And then the woman who was getting desperate because nobody was paying attention to her just went up to the stump of his amputated leg and started like dry humping it. And then the whole crowd just starts screaming and laughing. The funniest thing, I'll never forget. I still think he won though.
Yeah. So what I liked about the Limelight was they had these special parties for gay men on sort of the off nights, like Wednesdays and Sundays. And one was called Lick It, and the other one was called Res Erection, with the emphasis on erection. And so they featured a back room called the Lick It Lounge. And so it was for friskiness, but they actually had back then monitors, like guys that would go in with flashlights, making sure that things didn't get too wild. So, so their invites were really interesting, and in fact, one of them was this gorgeous, it featured this gorgeous, and it's in the book, it featured this gorgeous shot of this male couple having sex, and the photographer was Stephen Maison, who was extremely famous.
He was prolific back then.
Yes. And so, anyway, the headline was Safe Sex is Hot Sex, because that was the mantra, the message that needed to be communicated back then in order, so basically wear a condom if you're gonna fuck. So I love the fact that these club invites and these clubs, they weren't just to have a good time, they were also, help, educate people and save lives.
Yes, and they had like a dark room at that party, and I remember that party would go on Wednesday nights when I would be wearing the chicken suit in the other part of the club. So, and then under the chicken suit, I had my whole club kid thing with makeup and everything. So sometimes just to like throw a wrench into the dark room scenario, I would sneak in there in my crazy club looks, and then all of a sudden like turn on a light or something so that, to scare like the
Yes. And another mega club back then was the Tunnel, and some people the building's still there. They're renovated it into this sort of luxury office space. It's the Chelsea Terminal Warehouse, and it takes up one of those enormous blocks between 27th and 28th Street and 11th and 12th Avenues. So, but back then, it was this enormous club. And it was well known for its hip-hop and gay-centric parties. And it had a pretty good run. It went from the 80s to 2001. And Ernie, I know that you have had some experience with the Tunnel.
Yeah, well, I worked there too, and the Tunnel was actually the birthplace of the Club Kids, because the Club Kid scene started in the basement of the Tunnel sometime in around 88 or 89, and moved on from there. So, yeah, it was a great club, and there was a DJ in the bathroom, so it was one of the first clubs where they just decided, fuck it, gay guys are gonna go in the women's bathrooms, and so are drag queens, so let's just not even have gendered bathrooms anymore, and it was way ahead of its time in that era.
But also, it had a bartender in the bathroom
Yes,
too.
yes, it was
I love that.
It was a big bathroom.
So I don't know, what do you remember about the Palladium, which is another big mega club during that time?
The Palladium, it was opened by Steve Rubel, and I do remember the opening night, which was chaotic, and I couldn't get in because they had to close the metal barriers, but it was a fantastic club. It was humongous. There was this room in the basement designed by Kenny Scharf, which was Technicolor and wild. And I remember one time sitting there with my friends, and we were all in our like club regalia. And then Rick, the funk performer, Rick James, came in. And I don't know if any of you remember what he looks like, but he would always have these really long braids, and he was dressed in full leather. And he just walked in and looked at us, and then like turned around. So we chased the celebrity out of the lounge.
There were a couple of parties at the Palladium that were gay-centric. One was Bump, with an exclamation point, and one was Arena, and that featured, it had a residency of the DJ Junior Vasquez, who was probably one of the big names of DJs back during that time.
Yeah, and funny that you should mention Bump, because it was like, when they say Bump, I mean, they were kind of referring to drugs, and eventually Mayor Giuliani closed down the Palladium and Limelight and the Tunnel because he thought that they were drug supermarkets, which, I mean, maybe they were. But it was a very unsubtle name.
So
Smaller clubs now.
Yes, let's do the smaller clubs.
So one club that I noticed that wasn't in here much was Boy Bar, but you did mention other small clubs. So how did you decide what clubs you were going to focus on in the small club?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was more my favorite. I mean, I was being biased. It's my favorite and which ones that I had the most club invites with. And also, in this case, what I want to talk about now is Splash, is because I feel that when Splash opened in 1991, it ushered in a new era of gay clubs. Gay bars. It was large. They had high ceilings, a row of windows overlooking onto the sidewalk. So like anybody who could walk down the street could look in and say, oh, there's gay dudes, you know, together making out or whatever. And that was very different than most of the gay bars before that time. The ones before were almost like cave-like, and they were kind of dark, low ceilings, and if there were windows, they were often painted black. I mean, and there were no signs often to even say that it was a gay bar. So it just felt like the 90s really were ushering in this new era, and in 1991, Splash, I think, was at the forefront of that.
And if anybody's wondering why it was called Splash, it was because there were showers in there that were like shower stages. So guys would be naked taking showers, and everybody would be watching. And I remember there was, even from the bathroom, you could see like the naked guys taking showers. And I remember there was a certain urinal that I couldn't use because if I was there looking at the naked guys, I wouldn't be able to pee.
Okay, so now we're going to shift gears to, there's another space called Bar Room 432 that later got rebranded Mother, and it was on far west 14th Street. And they had these wild and crazy parties. I don't know if anyone remembers something called Jackie 6-0, and also the Click Club for women and their friends, and Meat, which I loved because it was really down and dirty and grungy, and it actually had a little back room, and they played like pretty extreme porno. But what I liked was their club invites, because they were just these sort of images, collages of naked guys that were just photocopied, like they went to Kinko's, I don't know if anyone knows what that is, and they would Xerox them on these brightly colored cardstock. And those, I just really love them. And some of the phrases or the headlines that they used were hard on go-go dudes and suck grooves, which I don't know what that means, but it just sounds really good that I wanted to check it out.
Yeah, their invites were kind of a throwback to the 1970s, like punk rock aesthetic, because by that time period, like the big mega clubs were doing these very sleek, highly graphically designed invites. So that was their reaction against that.
Did you have a favorite party there at all?
My favorite party at Mother was Click and Drag, which happened on Saturday nights. That was kind of like the cyberpunk, gothy, industrial party. And so yeah, that's the one that I went to most often.
Cool. So okay, now we're just down to one more venue, a smallish venue, and it was the Pyramid Club in the East Village. And it was a drag-centric performance space, and it was considered like a vanguard of counterculture. And it's where a number of drag queens got their start, like Lip Synca, Lady Bunny, RuPaul, Sister Dimension. All of them got their start way back in the 90s at the Pyramid Club.
It was actually the 80s.
You're right. The 80s. Thank you. So, is there do you have any stories?
Well, I have a lot of stories from that club. I moved to New York in 1984 and immediately started going to Pyramid because that was a happening club to go to, especially on Sunday nights. So I remember, my favorite story is when I went all dressed up in my outfit, and when I went in, and I remember the performer John Sachs, who was this kind of burlesque style of a performer who sang Hollywood-style music. He sang a lot of James Bond songs in his act. And anyway, he was really cool back then, and I remember him coming up to me and saying, "Wow, I really love your outfit." And I thought, oh, and I was like 21 at that point. I'm thinking, oh my God, John Sachs likes me. I almost wanted to just like kneel and kiss his cock ring, which I knew he was wearing, but he was fully clothed, so I couldn't do that. That's my favorite story. From John Sachs saying he loved my outfit.
Can you remember the outfit?
No, I can't. All I remember is him saying that.
But yeah, I mean, as Ernie mentioned, there's so many clubs. There's almost 100, I think, that we have mentioned in the book to some degree or other, and tonight we just wanted to touch on some of our favorites. But that's pretty much all we have to say. I don't know whether there's any questions.
Hundreds of questions. Right, hands up question. I see David Cash right over here. David Cash, what is your question?